I'm joined here by Professor Monder Ram, the Director of Center for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship at Aston University. Professor Monder, thanks for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Davies.
Awesome. So there's a lot I want to talk about today, but I think it's going to be great to talk first about your background. I was reading a bit about it before we started, and I thought it was quite fascinating. Tell us a little bit about how you grew up and how your career evolved.
Well, as you said, I'm Professor of Small Business and I'm Director for the Center for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship. But my most important credential is the fact that I'm a Brummie. I'm a born and bred in this city. And I love this city. I've got all my formative experiences here, my education here. And I like to think most of my contribution has been rooted in this city. My story is very much the sort of typical immigrant's tale. My parents came over here in the 50s with next to nothing, and they got really low-end jobs in foundries, factories, worked hard, toiled hard, saved hard, started their own business, and they felt their way around different kinds of enterprises, from retailing, then eventually into clothing, and that's when they made their mark. They slowly developed a market in the clothing sector. Fantastic. And eventually developed into a sizable concern. And I worked in that for a while before I escaped to the academy. But all of those experiences were accumulated in this city.
Fantastic. So great story. Grew up in the family business and then got into academics. What was it that drew your attention to academics, considering the fact that you came from a family business background?
It was an attempt to make sense of the world, really, or a number of different worlds. So when I got home after school, I was in the business. I was serving in the shop. I was doing what my parents told, of course, finding customers, etc. And then you step outside, you step into the city, you step into education. And the kind of businesses that my parents were running were described bore no relation to the reality. And that really, I think, was the real seed about how do I tell the story of businesses, of individuals, of families like the one I grew up in, because those families, those individuals, those businesses are very much the story of this city. And very few people were telling that story at that time. We're talking about the 80s, late 70s, 80s. No one was telling those stories. There's a lot of stereotypes about sweatshops, corner shops, but there wasn't the lived reality of those individuals and businesses being articulated in schools, in universities, in the media. So I think I made it my mission then to be someone whose job it was to articulate that story.
I think it's really fantastic that you chose that path, because then you went into academics, became a professor of small businesses.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that there were professors for small businesses, but you've really become this great expert on the subject matter of small businesses. And now you lead the Center for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship. So first of all, tell us about CREME. What is that organization about? I know it's a research organization, but what's its focus before we talk about some of its work?
Well, I've been an academic for over 30 years, and I've been a professor for 2/3 of that time, over 20 years. And for many years, in my early years as an academic, when I wrote my book, Managing to Survive, on the clothing industry in this city, we got a lot of attention very quickly because, as I said, we were the only ones telling that story about how the clothing sector was being really subject to a sort of perfect storm of cheap competition, growing competition, cheap imports, scarce labor, and how Asian manufacturers managed to survive in that time. And we diversified and we moved and told the story in different sectors. And then people began to take notice. And I was encouraged to set up this center, which I eventually did in 2004. But I was a bit reluctant to set up the center originally because, like many of us, with people of color, we don't want to be pigeonholed as people who can only speak on a topic which happens to be race or ethnicity. I think the messages we're conveying are universal messages. They're about the human condition, they're about business, they're about enterprise, they're about human flourishing. And often we get pigeonholed as being race experts or ethnic experts. That's only part of our identity. And it's that kind of inclusive vision that I tried to sort of incorporate in my work, and that's why I was initially quite resistant to the idea of setting up an ethnic specific organisation. But eventually I could see the case of having the Centre for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship, because simply there wasn't mainstream organisations within universities with this particular focus. And so I thought that would be a sensible way of putting this on the map, on the policy map, at the heart of the academy too, as well as in the mainstream public scholarship as well.
I think it's really, really important, the work that you've managed to do there, because there's a lot of conversation in today's society around issues surrounding small businesses, ethnic minority businesses and things of that nature. But to have academic research back that up, it lends a lot of credence to those subject matters and those social conversations, and galvanizes, I would presume, stakeholders together to actually do some work around solving these issues.
That is such an important point that you're raising, Davies. I think this whole issue of sort of race inequality is hugely contentious for very good reasons. You know, the people's lives at stake, and it's very difficult sometimes to navigate a way through that hostility or contention. I think the best way to do that is being very, very, very respectful of the evidence. And that's why it's a huge privilege to be doing my kind of work in the academy. Because yes, we have a commitment to scholarship, we have a commitment to equality, but we have a commitment to the evidence. We follow the evidence. And one of the, I suppose, areas that I'm so pleased with is that so many stakeholders now can see the value of the evidence in terms of the work that they do. I think as a university sector, sometimes academics have been reluctant to work directly with businesses and policy makers, but it's our job to get our message out there. We need to be much more proactive, engaged, and working alongside people like yourself, people in the business support community, business owners, and sharing our insights, sharing our experiences, and drawing from the evidence to improve the practice, whether it's in policy or whether it's the life of an entrepreneur.
Absolutely.
So getting that message out, the evidence, is a way of cutting through some of the areas of dispute. Fantastic. And it's a real powerful way of making a difference, which unites people.
Following the evidence. I think that's really critical. So let's talk about one of the stellar pieces of work that has come out of CREME. I was at the launch last year of the Time to Change report. Now, it's a remarkable report. You led the production of it. I'll let you talk about it. What's the Time to Change report? Why is it important?
Well, the Time to Change report is very much a collective effort from my colleagues and I at the centre. Well, I think it's a landmark report. What the Time to Change report does is offer for the first time a compelling, authoritative review of the evidence. The evidence is as good as it gets, drawing on experiences in the States, Canada, Europe, as well as 30 years close interrogation of the work we've done here. But it doesn't stop at just producing the evidence. It then makes sense of the evidence in terms of 10 very specific recommendations of what needs to happen next. And those recommendations aren't just our thoughts or our review of the evidence. They have been sense tested with business owners, policymakers, business support professionals before they were published. And now the report has, I suppose, a test of that is the fact that it's been endorsed by the banks on the one hand and black representative groups on the other, and every point in between. So now there's a real consensus on the evidence, but equally there's a consensus around the 10 recommendations. And we think that these recommendations, 10 recommendations, if implemented, will boost the contribution that black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs make from the 25 billion it is now to 100 billion. Absolutely. No one has challenged that figure, and that's based on the latest evidence. And that's a real prize. It's a real prize that should unite all of us. And we, as a UK PLC, I think we've got the business case to really go for it, and we do need to go for it given the challenging times that we live in. But I think, and I'm very passionate about this, that as a region, we should be very optimistic about this, and we should lead this agenda.
I totally agree. Couldn't agree more. We can't leave that money on the
Yeah,
table.
absolutely.
We've got to collaborate. We've got to work together. And I think that the work that was produced in the Time to Change report is very instrumental, because I could speak of a specific case where we took a look at the report, in my role as an access to finance person in the GBS LAP, and we said we could do a lot of work with ethnic minority businesses here and help them actually access more capital. And I would presume that a lot of organizations are now taking that stance. Talk to me a bit about the collaborative effort that has gone into the report and the implementation of the recommendations.
That's a great question. And so many people have said that already. The reports have been only out for a matter of months, but so many organizations and individuals have said that they've looked at the recommendations and they used them as a catalyst for practical work. So you've done it in your area of access to finance, a big issue. We know that NatWest Bank have responded by launching specific schemes. I know an entrepreneur who set up a business for making procurement easier. Those have all stemmed directly from the report. That makes me really pleased. You talked about collaboration. All the 10 recommendations that we've set out require collaboration to succeed. And so what we're planning to do over the next 2 or 3 years, and huge kudos to Aston University for investing in this, we're going to put a team of 3 or 4 specialists together who will work on nothing else apart from the recommendations of the report. What that means is that they're going to convene the banking sector, bring those banks together and say, well, this is good practice. How are you going to change your policies and procedures? How are you going to make it easier for Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs to get money, basically? But also the critical issue is, how are you going to stop the discouragement problem that means that Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs are sort of excluding themselves because they don't think they'll be financed? How are you going to tackle that? So we're going to be working to tackle that issue. We're going to be working to make procurement easier.
Fantastic.
Because procurement is a huge lever to empower Black and ethnic minority businesses. We want to see the development of community finance hubs in places like the West Midlands, which bring different parties together to share resources for the benefit of diverse communities.
I think it's a fantastic document that a lot of people need to then go to take a look at. And if you're watching this, I would strongly recommend that you go look for that report. Where can they find it?
On our website, CREME.
Okay, so just go to CREME and
CREME Aston, and you'll find it there.
CREME Aston, you'll find the report on there. You can download it, look at the recommendations for yourself. Now, once you take a look at it, hopefully you and your organizations can begin to take action as well. I want to touch on something really quickly before we go, because I know you're a deputy lieutenant as well in the West Midlands. Tell me about what that role is, because I mean, we could take a look at it on LinkedIn and say, oh, he fills this role, but I don't know what he does.
Well, I'm very proud to be appointed as a deputy lieutenant for the West Midlands. It's supporting the work of the Lord Lieutenant here in this region, Sir John Crabtree. It's a role that essentially means that you're the King's representative in the region, promoting the message of the monarchy, promoting the message. And one of the reasons I was really delighted to be appointed to that role is that it helps me to amplify what's great about this city. Its record of inclusion, its record of diversity, its record of the Commonwealth Games recently, which were a great success, and the work that we're doing as Aston, as CREME, to promote, I suppose, integration. All that is of a piece with the message of the lieutenancy.
Fantastic, fantastic. Lieutenancy, CREME, and the journey that you've been on as a professor of small business. I think it's really been a life of impact, and we're really, really grateful for all that you've been doing for the community, particularly for small businesses across the West Midlands and across the UK. Thank you very much, Monder, for joining me today.
My pleasure, Davies. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Monder. And that's our interview with Monder. Stick around. We've got more to come on the show.